Welcome back. Are you ready to get going? Yeah. Everyone, ready? Perfect. Maya Angelou said, do your best until you know better, and when you know better, you'll do better. Oprah Winfrey quotes that a lot, and I've heard it spoken so often that it sounds like it's true. But I would suggest that knowing something and doing something about what you know are on different sides of an enormously deep chasm that many of us battle to cross. How many of you know that you should exercise every day? And keep your hands up if you do it. And you know that you should eat healthily every day, and like me, you eat the cheesecake. So knowledge is great, it just doesn't get the job done. And so for the second half of the session, we're going to go to work on, firstly, reminding you of a research-backed formula that you can use to help people create new habits. And then we're going to dig into how to apply that formula in your work. And one thing we've learned in the Alaska Wellness Academy for the last 3 years is that the companies that come to these events have very, very different businesses. From oil and gas to home nursing, and from pharmaceuticals to services and insurance businesses. You have very unique businesses. Some of them are massive, and some of them are 4 or 5 people. So Scott is going to lead you through some work where you get to figure out what might work for your company to make exercise part of the fabric of your business, part of the culture of your business. So let's get to work first of all on the formula, and any of you who have been here before, this will be familiar for you. But I want you to really go to work on it or think about it as if it's fresh in the context of how we have people exercise in these 2 to 4 minute breaks, roughly 3 or 4 times during the day. The formula for creating habits says that people will create new behaviors, and those behaviors will turn into habits if and only if a few things are true. Number 1, people feel confident and competent. Without confidence, nobody starts. Without competence, no one succeeds. So those 2 things are like 2 sides of the same coin. And for most of us, we think that the reason why we don't exercise or why other people don't exercise is because they don't have willpower or they don't have motivation. But this is more often than not the reason why people don't start. Now, reflect on that for a moment, because when it comes to exercise, you may be thinking, hang on, everyone I know can walk or run or exercise a little bit, but when it comes to exercising at work, it's a very different story. Do you believe, like I do, that for many people, they lack the confidence to exercise with others at work? Because it feels a little embarrassing maybe, or it feels like, exercise is something I should do at home. Exercise is something that will make me be looked at funnily by my boss because I should be attending to patients or clients. So you'll agree with me that this is a real issue. And we'll talk about ways of making it easier for people to practice exercise in these breaks in a way that doesn't occur for them as scary or requiring courage. And one of the best ways to help people build confidence and confidence, so the 2 sides together, is by doing things in groups. Mostly we gain confidence when we see someone else doing something, and we believe that if they can do it, I can do it. So that's a way to boost my belief in myself. But we also learn from the modeling behaviors of others. If you've never worked out at a gym before, and you sign up and you're all excited, and then you go there, and there's all these complicated machines, the first thing you do is pretend you know what you're doing, and then sit down and watch someone else, and then go and do exactly what they do. And it's the same in all domains of life. We will learn by watching. And what we learn is that we're capable and how to be capable, so confidence and competence. If you have that, and the more you have of it, the more things will occur for you as easy to start and easy to maintain. But of course, you have to want to make a change in the first place. And that's why the second part of the formula is motivation. Motivation is more than merely desire. It's the compulsion to act. Here's the difference. I desire to lose a few pounds, makes no difference, until I'm compelled to actually eat more healthily. And we often think that What's missing is I just don't want it enough, I don't desire it enough, but there's quite a distinct difference in our brains between the feeling of desire and the feeling of compulsion. We feel compelled when our brains release dopamine. Dopamine is the molecule that makes us pay attention and that prepares us for action. And it turns out that the things that release dopamine in our brains are not the things that we mostly use to try and motivate people. In most businesses, when we want people to work harder, what do we use as a motivation tool? Money, in the form of commissions and bonuses and incentives, often delayed 3, 6, or 12 months. And all we know about reward science tells us that delayed incentives have very little power, and cash is the most expensive, least effective way to motivate somebody. Now, when you realize that, it makes you ask, well, why do we so commonly use cash and incentives delayed in the workplace? And the simple answer is two things. Number one, we've always done that. And number two, the reason we've done that is because if you go and ask people, what would you like, or what would it take for you to work harder? What do people say? Pay me more. I heard a great phrase the other day from a salesperson. They said, I'm a coin-operated salesperson. Put more money in and I'll sell more. And we tend to think that we ourselves and others operate that way. But now for 3 decades, behavioral psychologists have looked at the science of rewards and motivation, and the big headline is purpose and a desire to improve and gain mastery are highly motivating for most human beings. So is making a difference for others. And even though we say we want to be paid more, and we appreciate it, and we like what we can do with money, money doesn't get the job done as effectively as purpose, meaning, and contribution. And that's never more true than I think that in this domain of exercise. Because exercise is one of those things that right now lives in a different bucket from work. We're used to being paid to work, and we're used to this transaction where if you want me to work harder, pay me more. But work has a negative connotation. So as soon as I call something work, what comes to mind for you? Hard, laborious, maybe not fun. And the danger of paying people to exercise is that it'll take it from the bucket of things we do for fun and put it into the bucket of things we do for pay. That's what we call work. And if we want to create exercise as something that people feel about like they feel about work, we may just be removing whatever motivation they had in the first place. So I'd like you to consider, if you do have incentives to pay people or to encourage them to exercise, they're probably not going to be as effective as if you can find a way to inspire them to exercise by appealing to their higher purpose or what it can do for them and the people they care about. Scott spoke earlier about the impact of exercise on kids' performance. The only way we've seen to engage teachers in school districts to be really motivated to exercise is by sharing with them the impact that the exercise can have on their quality as a teacher. Remember, greater stamina, fewer errors, better decision making, but also what a role model they can be for their kids. So teachers that exercise, that inspire kids to do the same things, get better grades, get better results, and that's what they care about as teachers. So when you take this back, I challenge you in the next day or week, or as you roll out different programs that you'll invent today, is to really look at these two things with new eyes, and don't go to the traditional methods to motivate people. Think about how you can connect through story or emotion, an opportunity to exercise at work, framed as a way to be a better employee, a way to be better at customer service, a way to be a better parent, whatever you think people already find meaning in. Now, these two things are in green for a reason in the formula, because if you're capable and you're motivated, it makes it easier to get into action. Without confidence, as I said, you don't start. Without motivation, you don't care to start. And without competence, you'll fail fairly quickly. But it's not the only reason why people fail. They fail because life happens, things get in the way. And so there are two other elements of this formula that we need to attend to. As long as capability and motivation are high, we're likely to create a new behavior unless, and that's why this greater than sign is there, barriers get in our way or we're distracted by temptations. And the difference between the two are barriers are static. They don't move. A barrier can be, I live a long way from the gym. Or a barrier could be, I forgot my sneakers, so I can't work out. Or a barrier could be, I don't have the time. Things to notice about barriers are whether they're real, like how far you live from a health club, or imagined, like I don't have enough time, makes no difference. In fact, the barriers we make up, when you hear them in someone else, they'll sound like excuses. When you're telling them about your own life, they'll sound very real. Our made-up barriers are probably the most difficult things to overcome. Why? Because we made them up and we love them. But at least I said they don't fight back. Temptations do. And the reasons temptations fight back is because there's somebody or some company behind the things that tempt us that is attempting to distract us from our commitments to new exercise plans or new health plans, whatever they may be. As an example, media and entertainment companies hate the fact that we exercise because mostly we're not watching Netflix when we exercise. Agreed? So they're going to find new and interesting ways, great programming, new TV shows, or autoplay. How many of you, by a show of hands, watch Netflix? Or something like that? And have you noticed the autoplay function? You've watched one series of Orange is the New Black, and suddenly 2, 3, 4, or 5 have gone by. It's 2 a.m. and you've been binge watching. They have succeeded in tempting you away from whatever you were planning to do. And the more we surround people with technology, the more we tempt them away from being focused on work and focused on exercise at work. This is not just a problem for exercise. Temptations are probably the biggest killer of performance and productivity. And some culprits for that are open plan offices. How many of you work in an open plan office? Yeah. Open plan offices didn't exist 15 to 20 years ago mostly. There were these closed off offices, and as we moved through generations, we thought it was a really great idea to open it up and make them more beautiful and make people be more in connection because fostering social relationships matter. That's all true. But what we now know about open plan offices is that they are a hotbed for interruptions. And if you are interrupted while you're focused on something, and then somebody leaves your desk, they just came and asked you one question and then they leave, they think it's just cost you 2 minutes. I just had one quick question. The research says it takes you 15 minutes until you can be fully refocused again. So if you're in an open plan office and you get interrupted 4 times an hour on average, you would be better off just not coming to work. That's how severe the impact is of temptations. Now, if we're trying to apply this formula to making exercise every hour or every second hour possible at work, we've got a few things to do. We've got to figure out a reason why people will want to do this. And if we say, well, it'll reduce your healthcare costs, expect no one to show up. If we say, well, this will make you work harder, maybe people will be interested, provided the framing is around your customers and not your profits. Have you noticed how much effort you're prepared to put in to be an awesome employee and to do things for the people you serve, either your internal customers or external customers? By a show of hands, how many of you have in some way over the last month sacrificed your health in the service of your customers, your employees, or your company? I didn't even have to wait for the hands. There were some shooting up already. And I think therein lies the secret to success here, is if we are already willing to put so much effort into serving our customers, we need a new story for people, which is the best way to serve your customers is by being fully prepared to perform and to avoid making mistakes and to have the stamina, mental clarity, and decision-making quality to do the best work you can. Your access to doing that is exercising 2 to 4 minutes every hour on the hour. So it becomes part of our customer service plan, part of our performance plan, not something apart from how we do those things. That might get you some of the motivation that you've been missing in your programs. When it comes to capability, confidence, and competence, think about how to make it easy for people to exercise at work. And we'll look at some of those in a moment. But that's likely where you will focus most of your energy. And what I want you to notice is it doesn't take much of a barrier or much of a temptation to distract people. I often use that example. I think I used it here in a previous session. If you remember those VHS things that we used to have before we had DVD players that sat under the TV, and it required about 5 buttons to program the time. And if you were like my house, that clock just flashed without getting set for 6 years because it was too much of a barrier to open a manual, read 5 instructions, and set the time. And the same is true for 401k enrollment and a lot of things in life. A tiny barrier can be enough for people not to participate. So I'd really like you to think about how you can empower the managers in your companies to clear the path, to remove the barriers, to make it easy for people to show up at group 2-minute stretches or high-intensity exercises that you arrange for your employees. So far, so clear? Now, this formula is maybe interesting, but it's not very practical until you figure out where you can apply this formula. And you may remember from previous sessions, we talked about what makes up the fabric of your company. There are 4 contexts, as we call them. And in each of those contexts, you need to exercise the power to create this formula coming true. So before we work on the context, I want to remind you, you need 4 powers as a designer. The power to grow people's capability. Why do we say grow? Because confidence and competence are like a plant that needs to be nourished. You don't suddenly become confident, and you don't suddenly become competent. Small, bite-sized chunks are the way to do it. For example, we have these exercise programs where we say, everyone gets a Fitbit, and now you should reach 10,000 steps. And if you haven't done 10,000 steps in your lifetime, let alone in the last 6 months, that may occur as a target too big for many people. And in a moment, they will lose faith in themselves or confidence and opt out. So think about starting low and slowly increasing the challenge level for people. And you'll see today the exercises we did, for some people that may have been even a stretch too far. So you really need to start at the lowest common denominator and build it up over time. The second power you'll need is the power to breathe life into or inspire motivation. And unlike capability, which grows slowly over time, people can become highly motivated in a second, like a light going on, and equally can become demotivated in a second. You ever had that experience where you're super motivated to get fit, you go and sign up at the gym, you go for your first session, it's fantastic, and then you never go back for the rest of the year? Because motivation disappears quickly. And one of the only ways to sustain motivation over time is giving people a long-term higher purpose goal. Like, the reason I want to do this has some meaning to my life that sustains me, even when my willpower, which is a temporary thing, flags or lowers. Third power you'll need is the power to help people overcome barriers, and I would argue if you're in HR or benefits or wellness, this is a power you need to boost or grow in your managers, line managers. The reason you need to overcome barriers is because they're static, they don't move, so you go around them or over them or remove them. And barriers might be real, like we don't have the space in our office to exercise, or I have remote employees, or they're in areas where the geography or the climate just makes it impossible. Those are all very real barriers. But also remember the barriers that we make up, and those are perhaps the harder ones to deal with. And finally, you'll need the power to resist temptation, to help people figure out how to say no to the distractions on our cell phones and the temptations to watch TV or to eat unhealthily or to do it tomorrow, the ultimate temptation to procrastinate. So I said there were 4 life contexts that make up the business. And remember, what a context is the background to our lives that highly influences how we behave, but that we don't notice. And there are 4 things that make up our business that are contexts. They are our own mindsets, how we think about exercise, how we think about life in general, based on our prior experiences and our views and opinions and our data that we have stored in our brains and our stories about it all. There's the influence of other people, and perhaps more than anything else, the behavior of others influences our behavior. And you'll notice when I asked you to stand up and exercise, it became a lot easier because we were all doing it. Just for a moment, imagine how difficult it would be if I'd said, okay, we're going to now do an exercise, but just one of you is going to do it. I mean, you're dying now that I'm even pointing at you. Okay, you wish I would move on to the next person. Imagine how difficult it would be if you try and do it on your own. And now consider that most of our approaches in wellness ask people to go and exercise and do things on their own. And we have sayings that reflect this. You know, it takes a village, we say, because it reflects the fact that a task shared is a task halved. When you work out with people, it just feels easier because there's a social and fun element to it. So it really matters that whatever solutions you come up with today, you think about how to make it something that we do as a group rather than something we ask people to do on their own. And that's why programs that say, you know, work all day and then go home and exercise on your own time are very likely to fail. We were talking at the break about a walking program that got canceled because senior leaders' view was, well, people are taking 10 or 15 minutes away from their work. And so if you want to be fit, and we want you to be fit, you should do that at home. And I hope you saw this morning the illogic in that kind of approach. So that's the social context. We and the people we work with show up at work, but what we show up to, or the place in which we work, physical spaces really matters. And if you're working from a home office, or you're working up on the slopes, or you're working outside, it makes it very different a proposition to exercise. And last but not least, there are the systems under which we operate. The laws and rules, how long your shift is. And so we'll dig into each of these things and look at some of the solutions that other companies have used. And then Scott's going to take you through an exercise to allow you to figure out what might work for your own company. What we're hoping for at the end of today's session is you leave with your workbook completed, and in there 4 or 5 things that you can do tomorrow to make a difference to exercise at work in your workplace. So let's go on to systems. We're going to go in through reverse order. And systems, remember, are made up of a few things. It's the machinery of how work works, or the way we do things here, the policies and procedures, the business processes that people follow. And what makes systems difficult to design, in a sense, is because they're made up of things that are intangible, like pay and reward systems. I mean, money is tangible, but if you think about it, an incentive system isn't something you actually feel. It's something you touch with your hands. It's an abstract concept, in the same way that feedback from your managers or encouragement in the system, what you get rewarded for, is all abstract, but it still affects us very intensely. How many of you would consider yourselves to be rule breakers? Okay, so a few hands going up a little bit, right? Most of the time, though, we follow the rules. And so if the rules of work say you start at 8 and you end at 5, you'll arrive at 8:05 and leave at 4:55 if you're a rule breaker. You're not going to show up at 12 and leave at 2. So by and large, human beings follow laws. And those laws are not immutable. We made them up. Imagine if you worked in a company where the law was, you show up at 8 o'clock and we do 2 minutes of exercise. And before our break at 10 a.m., we do another 2 minutes of exercise, and that was just the rules. Now, I don't mean rules in the sense that, you know, we're going to force people to exercise, because that may actually be illegal. I mean it in the sense of just this is the way we do things here. So here are some of the ways in which companies in this state and in other states have gone about designing into their systems ideas for making it easy for people to exercise. So for example, having walking or standing meetings. In my own company, we cleared our boardroom of desks and chairs and tables so that when we meet, and we meet fairly frequently, we're standing or we're doing squats or we're doing some kind of exercise, just so that it's built into the fabric of the workday. And we don't have complaints by anyone saying, well, I'm exercising and therefore I'm not working. Exercise is one of those things you can do while you work. So I want you to take a moment and look through that list, maybe put a tick next to each of the things that you think might work in your company or are missing in your company that might work and that you think are candidates for changes that you would like to recommend or go to work on. Take a couple of moments to go through that list, please. If you're not sure what lead goals are, in the science of goal setting, lead goals are things that lead to outcomes. So a lead goal might be doing 10,000 steps a day. An outcome goal might be running a marathon. And when it comes to goal setting, all the research says setting lead goals is a better way to get outcomes than setting outcome goals. And just think about that in a sales environment. We tend to say we'll only pay you when you make a sale, when really, if we were following the research, we would want people to be focused on and paid for making calls, making proposals, the things that lead to an outcome. So I don't want you inventing your new ideas yet, just making a list, ticking which one of these things you think might work or might be missing, because in a moment we're actually going to go to work in your workbooks on figuring out a solution for your company.
Okay, so it's one thing for us to come together and listen to an expert like Andrew explain how context influences behavior and health and performance in our organizations, but we recognize that it's entirely another for us to take these ideas back to our organizations and actually convert them into change. So while we have the luxury of all being here together, we wanted to roll up our sleeves a little bit and try to take some of these ideas from that sort of high-level idea stage to a stage that's a little bit closer to actionable for us to take back and actually try to do something with. So to do this, we're going to focus on an imaginary company that we created called Moose Tracks Credit Union. And Moose Tracks, if you will imagine with me, is a local Anchorage-based banking organization. They're pretty small, about 100 employees spread across 3 locations. They have a very diverse workforce, lots of different types of people doing different types of jobs, and they hope to grow very rapidly over the next few years. They're a small player in a very competitive market, and they know that they're going to have to compete aggressively. Now, in HR at Moose Tracks, there are 2 people, Maria and a part-time specialist. So Maria handles every HR function, much like the people that I've worked with most during my career. And of course, recently the CEO of the organization came to Maria and said, you know, I look around the workplace and I don't see a lot of healthy behavior. In fact, I see a lot of unhealthy behavior. And the energy level is low, we're kind of lackadaisical, and I worry that this could prevent us from achieving our goals. And so Maria, if you would, I'd like you to try and tackle this problem for us. And of course, Maria doesn't have anything else to do, and so she says yes. And let's assume, if you would, that Maria doesn't have a budget and she has to be particularly cunning. She needs to leverage this influence of context in her organization to try and create change. And we're going to focus specifically for this exercise on the systems context. Okay. So I've seen a lot of really good, substantive-looking conversation taking place around the room. And this is really a hard activity. It's not easy to come up with policies and modifications to process in an imaginary bank, and we recognize that. So I'm curious to know if there were any ideas that came out of your conversations that you found particularly interesting or relevant, creative. Anybody want to volunteer to share? Jim's got one. Yes. Yeah. Is it on?
These are for ideas for incentives, right? Yeah. So we had some ideas for some incentives, just things that we thought would be easy to implement. And one of them is allocate time for walks. So maybe I thought 30 minutes 2 times daily would be good if you paid people to actually get out, and 1 hour a day would probably be a good investment in walking or running. Outdoor one-on-ones to encourage people to, if they're not walking to do the one-on-ones, at least they're more inclined to do something physical. And then we have a ton of meetings at Premera, so I thought if you mandated that every meeting started with the kind of exercises that we did today, that might be a good way to go too, because we meet so often. You get a lot of exercise in, even if it was just 2 minutes per meeting. But then I thought we have an engagement program now where if you, there's a tool called Every Move that we have where if you do activity and log it, and Fitbit logs it automatically, then you're eligible for a contribution into the HSA plan or a check. Instead of just paying though, I thought, what if you had like a menu of things that people really liked, like say some spa time or massages or yoga or something that they could really choose from that motivates them to be able to not pay them cash, but some kind of other compensation. So
Yeah, those are all great suggestions. Did anyone else have anything around meetings, changing the way meetings are performed? That's great. Only one person?
Oh,
Yeah.
we tend to do a safety moment. That's been a pretty standard thing for us. But I like the wellness moment. So just so that people can be cognizant and aware that, it's starting the group with an idea. And then having somebody, whoever's doing the meeting and leading the meeting, be responsible to bring that up. And I also like the idea of having that group session. It's obviously easier to do something together than it is individually. And so starting that meeting with stretches or something like that, we like that idea too.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Walking meetings are a very popular idea. They come up a lot in wellness circles and conversations about wellness. What I see less frequently are opportunities that people take to identify moments where you have a safety stand-up meeting, a safety check, or a morning stand-up where you talk about the priorities of the day, the things that need to be knocked out. Those are the perfect opportunities just to move your bodies a little bit. And if it becomes integrated and part of that process, then it's no longer something that you have to think about, it's just something that you do. Where did Denise go? There. I'll give you mine. I'll trade.
Do I have to stand?
You don't have to stand, no.
So what I was thinking is if we're looking at a credit union, we have a lot of tellers that are really stuck, and I like the idea of the 5 minutes before, because at banks, you unlock a door at 9 a.m. And so when I worked at a bank many, many years ago, you had that time right before, and so for like your tellers and stuff to do the 5 minutes like we did here, like that would be an opportunity to do that. And then I created something for our employer group called 4 Minutes, and it encourages 4 minutes of activity once every hour. And then you put up reminders in places like by the coffee machine, in the bathrooms. You remind them that, if you have a loop in the hallway, you can do that like 10 times in 1 minute, and you end up getting, like a little quarter-mile walk. I think it's punny, but squat where you squat. So like I encourage them to do 3 sets of 10 exercises every time you go to the bathroom, because that's your own personal time. Nobody can take it away from you, and nobody can see what you're doing. So you don't have to feel bad about it if you think that it's, but then there's an activity log that goes along with the 4 minutes so that they can log the activity that they're doing and then come together and talk about that in their meetings in the morning. So.
Yeah, I'm going to remember that squat where you squat for my next client conversation. Your example was fantastic because you actually demonstrated where you're leveraging both the systems context and the spaces context, which sort of puts you ahead to our next activity, but that was particularly excellent. Thank you. Can anybody beat squat where you squat? We don't need to try to even compete with it. We'll let that stand. Any other interesting ideas? Funny ideas?
So at our company, we have a wellness program where every group chooses a month. I'd like to say choose, but they're actually told, voluntold. So each group, like the providers would choose this month. This month they chose to look at earth wellness, and so it's recycling, and for every 100 cans or every 100 bottles, then you get 100 wellness points. At the end of the month, that wellness point turns into what's called a star point, and the star point is worth $1. So every month a different department chooses. So for admin in July, ours is going to be on exercise. And so we have a calendar, and then every day of the calendar, there will be something like going for a walk or doing squats or going for a hike. And you can average up to 100 points every month. So it's just a way to get everybody involved in their own areas as well as in the clinic itself.
Yes. Yeah, a wellness program is in itself a system that
Exactly.
we introduce, and it often includes those elements. A great example. Did anyone have any ideas related to recognition systems by chance?
Well, as she was walking over here, I was thinking perhaps it wasn't recognition as much as it was well, rewarding, if you will, and that where you would have your activity log from your gym. So if you had a gym and you had gone to the gym for 90 days, and I mean, in that 90 days, you brought the activity log, and if you had gone 15 days in that 90 days to the gym, then we would pay 1 month of your membership. So we wanted to see that they were already going, not necessarily incentivized to go, because what we found out, like Andrew was saying earlier, that you go, you sign up, and then it's too intimidating and you quit going. So we wanted to see that they were already going, and then we would reward them for going.
Yeah, that's a great example. Another idea that I've discussed with a few clients recently, many organizations have formal rewards that they give out once, maybe twice a year. And more often than not, these rewards are focused entirely on traditional business performance metrics, the person who sells the most, the best customer service agent. But there, I think, is an opportunity for organizations to introduce things that are focused a little bit more on culture, health, and wellness. So who's the individual in your organization, for example, who has contributed the most over X period of time to make the workplace healthier? Could be just making it a brighter, more positive, more fun place to work, or specifically one in which you feel like you're more empowered to be healthy. Just another idea to throw out there. Any others? There's some good suggestions here. We've hit a lot of the bases.
I was thinking of how we had come about in making the safety, and I'm doing it side by side. We have a huge safety culture, but a few years ago, it was not wrapped into performance reviews. You were not really accountable for that, other than that was a lot of where people were getting written up or managers weren't happy about that with people's behaviors. And my comments at that time were, if you want people to be accountable, then you need to bring it up front and bring it home. So make that part of their performance review for participation. When we started doing that, instead of it becoming the stick and it being something that you didn't do or a bad thing, people started becoming proactive in making their participation more in advance and their own responsibility. So I feel like the wellness could be the same thing, and activity could be the same thing. First, you get your CEO, president involved, like you had with your credit union, have them make the announcement that this is what their expectations are, this is what their goal is. Have each individual sign a commitment. They actually sign a commitment to participate, and then incorporate that into their performance review on really how much did they participate. Making sure, obviously, that you have alternatives for different levels of activity and their physical capabilities, but bringing it right up front, and that way it brings it home individually to each person.
Yes. Empowering managers using systems to adopt a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility for the health and wellness of the people working for them that they're serving is a simple but powerful way to use the systems context to influence behavior. Any other ideas?
So I was just thinking from the example that we have of this fictitious organization that wants to grow, from a strategic perspective, if we look at incorporating this not into the extrinsic compensation, the cold hard cash, but intrinsic compensation, that this culture of wellness is a benefit that we have for employees. So through that recruitment and selection process, you're incorporating that to say, this isn't just what we expect of you if you become an employee of ours, but this is also what you can expect of us, is this whole thing around the intrinsic wellness compensation.
Yeah, that's a brilliant example. So one way to describe that would be building wellness, building fitness into your corporate value statement, into the core values and mission statement of your organization. As if the band rehearsing wasn't enough, we've got some additional distractions to deal with. So we're going to spend one more little chunk of time on this exercise. And it's going to be time for you to take everything that you've heard at your table around the room and really try to consider which of these things could you take back to your organization? And then which one thing, at least on that list, will you take back to your organization? And at the bottom of the workbook page, if you haven't already filled this out, and it's okay if you have, there's a section for you to list 5 things. If you can get to 5, great. If you can only get to 4, that's fine. But try to circle the one thing that you really feel like you could do.